clarify, if I could, my understanding, and to compare it to yours and to see whether you acknowledge this. While the proposed legislation deals with criminality and therefore removes the criminal element for juveniles, you made a comment about relative to kids below a certain age. So now you're right in saying the federal legislation removes that criminal element for these juveniles. But I'm sure you're aware, and you also acknowledge, and with that you sort of say we're in contradiction with our nation's obligations and treaty. But you're certainly aware that every province has put or is putting legislation in place which will irrespectively make it illegal, not criminal, but illegal for juveniles to possess or partake in marijuana. Which means, yes, you're right in saying it's removed from the federal legislation, but I read specifically the legislation in Quebec and Ontario. It makes it very clear it will still be illegal for persons below a certain age, 18 years old in Quebec, to possess or to make use of marijuana and so on. Are you aware of that? And does not resolve some of your concerns re juveniles? I know it doesn't deal with the issue of adults, but relative to young people?
It doesn't at all, no. We still have the raw reality that young people in Canada, young people 12 to 18, have access to and may use without any legal restriction. And it hasn't changed anything. Those over 18 is something else. But those under 18 is a major concern.
Yeah. But I don't, if you wish, I can send you legislation in Quebec. That's not accurate in that it is illegal for a person below Quebec to possess or make use of marijuana. It's very clear. That act makes it very clear. I agree on the federal side, but not the provincial sides. And so the choice you have, the choice the legislators had is that if you leave it as it is, being a criminal element, that means that the 13-year-old who gets caught possessing marijuana, then he's a criminal. He's got a criminal record. And what they rather chose, as you know, historically in the provinces, is for juveniles, as opposed to sending them to prison because they smoked the marijuana joint, they're more development-oriented. They're more, a little bit like they're doing in Portugal. They're basically trying to coerce and manage the issues to better habits. But you don't seem to acknowledge at all the provincial legislation in each case, which your interpretation is a free-for-all, but I suggest you read the provincial legislation in that respect, which complements the federal legislation.
But let me say, first of all, as you know, the Drug Act, the Drug Control Act, is federal, and they have prohibited, up until now, the use of marijuana. Now, under this legislation, because of the federal provincial jurisdictions, the provinces will be in charge of distribution. Under the legislation, the provinces will be in charge of distribution and the sale, and it'll vary across every province. Is different. And but if the federal government said, no, we're going to have, as we've always been, the Drug Control Act, then they wouldn't be doing that. It's because the federal government has released the lever and said, go ahead, that is what's happening. But the provinces and the territories would not be doing that if it weren't for the legislation.
I suggest you read the legislation being proposed in the provinces. I think it complements very well the federal legislation and attacks your concern relative to possession of cannabis by the youth.
Oh, yours, maybe I'm missing the point, probably. But I think what you're saying is that the provinces can restrict it.
They have,
but they cannot. They cannot restrict it because it says what the federal act governs what the province can do. They only have so much jurisdiction, and it's the federal legislation that says what the provinces may do. And if the federal government says no, they wouldn't.
You're right.
The federal government has said they can.
You're right, read the criminal element of it. That's why it's going to remove the criminal element, but it doesn't prohibit the provinces of putting laws in place, which is the case relative to possession of marijuana by the youth. And I think it satisfies your concern, read the youth. But I suggest you read it. If not, I can send you a copy of the legislation, at least in Quebec.
She doesn't have to worry with provincial legislation.
Thank you.